But first, as expected, Peter Dutton has neatly sidestepped the trap the government thought it had laid out for him. In question time today, as I said, the Prime Minister, pretty cocky, was not happy with the Coalition's decision to not oppose Labor's broken promise on tax.
Come on. If you were fair income, you'd vote against our measure and you'd commit to roll it back.
You heard him. If you were fed income, he told Dutton, you'd vote against our measure and restore it. Now, sorry, PM, if you were fed income, you would just do what you've promised more than 100 times.
Labor will support all of the legislated tax cuts which are in place now. Of course, tax cuts were legislated earlier on in this term, and we've said that we won't seek to change those legislated tax cuts.
And I've said on the stage 3 tax cuts that they've been legislated. People are entitled to operate on the basis of that certainty.
But look, Dutton's no fool. He's a Liberal and a Conservative at that. And no politician worth a Liberal name wants to stand between any worker and lower taxes. What the Coalition has decided to do here is to not oppose Labor's tax changes, to not oppose them. And that's an important distinction. It doesn't mean they support them. It doesn't mean that these are the tax cuts the Coalition would put through the Parliament if they were in power, because they are not. The Coalition stands by the original legislation. It is only the Prime Minister here who has broken his word. Now, that might sound like a semantic point, but it's not. Dutton isn't for this broken promise of Labor. He's just not stopping them putting it through the Parliament, letting these changes pass, if you will. And in doing so, he's denying Labor the wedge the PM clearly wanted and Labor's strategists hoped they would get as part of their desperate need to reset this struggling government. Labor wanted Dutton to oppose these changes. They wanted a fight with the Coalition so that they could try and paint them as uncaring on cost of living. Well, as the Coalition party room decided today, they're not blocking these changes. So there goes the wedge. Today, some in Labor were trying to run the line that Dutton's decision to let the cuts pass somehow makes the Prime Minister less of a liar after breaking his word, but that doesn't wash either. It's the Prime Minister who said, my word is my bond. It's the Prime Minister who's in charge of the government and, as a consequence, tax policy. And it's the Prime Minister who's broken his word.
My word is my bond.
I can confirm that we haven't changed our position. We have no change to our plans. Tax cuts will happen in July.
But let's be under no illusions about what's happened here, because it's important that Labor doesn't get away with trying to rewrite history, as so often they do. Lower income earners have already had 2 rounds of tax cuts. Stage 1, which came into effect in 2019, and Stage 2, which started in July 2022. Now, Stage 3, which was to begin on 1 July this year, was just enabling higher income earners to get ahead of the bracket creep that's been pushing up their tax for 15 years. Far from being a tax cut for the rich, it was just a measure of fairness for all. But remember 2 things I've said here this week. The first is that every taxpayer right now wants as much relief they can get, so any poll that shows support for these cuts doesn't surprise me. Now, that doesn't mean that voters like a liar in the lodge, and they can readily take the money now, of course they can, and punish the Prime Minister's lack of honesty later. Second, when people realise these tax cuts are less than $15 a week and not due anyway until the middle of the year, by which time there'll have been 2 automatic increases in petrol, more increases in power bills, groceries and more, I don't believe they'll be as grateful as some in Labor think. Julia Gillard's promise that there would be no carbon tax under a government I lead only became an albatross around her government's neck after months and months of work by the then opposition. If any of the cocky government MPs, Prime Minister included, think this is over, well, think again. You thought you'd won the voice too, but look how that imploded in your face.